monetizing digital services since 2004, boosting the entertainment industry by making digital content accessible for everyone. AWG, where innovation meets monetization.
Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Welcome to the podcast. In this podcast episode, I talk with Alex Atwood about gig work trends and how companies can leverage gig workers while being fair. Alex Atwood, welcome to the conversation today.
It's a pleasure to be here, John. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it is a pleasure. You're joining us from the Orlando area. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about gig work trends and how companies can leverage gig workers while being fair to them. This is something I feel rather strongly about. Just generally, not exploiting workers is something I feel very strongly about. And because the landscape of work is shifting and we have more and more gig workers, this is an important question that we need to explore. And it's kind of a new horizon. There's been gig workers around for forever, but the prevalence of gig work and freelance work and people who are not traditional employees of organizations has just grown so rapidly in recent decades that it's becoming harder and harder for us to make sure that we're taking care of people the way we might expect everyone to be taken care of. As we get started, I wanted to share Alex's bio with everybody. Alex Atwood has more than 20 years of experience as a serial entrepreneur, helming 4 startups in the hospitality and staffing space. He has fostered skills, efficient teams, and as founder and CEO of SaniStaff, co-founder of Gravy Work, CEO of PSG Inc., and CEO of the Hospitality Training Institute. He has served more than 8,000 satisfied customers across staffing and hospitality and serves as an angel investor in firms that help to build a better world. What a tremendous background. Alex, a real pleasure having you. Now let's dive on in to this conversation.
Yeah, this is an industry. Well, now it goes by gig work, right? But the idea of temporary staffing of temps has been around since the industrial age, right? When their companies needed a workforce that was malleable, and more importantly, when people wanted to enter the workforce, one of the options they had was taking temporary jobs. And these jobs served as an on-ramp to people to be able to get, careers going for themselves. And it also always served as a way for companies to be able to mitigate all types of things like cyclical adjustments in their, in a particular market capacity, or for manufacturing. There's just such a need to be able to ramp up and ramp down as needed. So it really was a win-win situation. You have people that want to be able to get into the workforce. You want to have another on-ramp. The temporary staffing industry a lot of the times gave the opportunity for companies to try people out before they actually, take a full-time permanent job. And it gives the same option for the person taking the job. So I think what's happened is, as technology has started to evolve and people have started to have literally in the palm of their hand the ability to make money on demand, it's now turned into a gig economy. Not to say that the temporary staffing industry still isn't alive and well, but they're sort of melding together a bit. And so my background specifically comes from years in the temporary staffing industry, not just myself, but my parents go all the way back to the early 1970s, specifically in industrial staffing. My father had a staffing agency that he started with my mother. My grandfather, when he came from the old country, started a staffing agency. And so almost everyone in my family had that. And, it's not too surprising that I worked as a temp when I was a high school student. And so I was pretty familiar with, what it meant to take temporary or gig jobs before there was, really before there was an internet, right? I mean, I'm really dating myself now, but so I have a familiarity to the value of this type of work that I think now has just become more prevalent. It's now the gig economy. And now, you don't necessarily need to go to an interview. You don't necessarily need to do any of that. You need a phone. You may need a car, maybe not. And really just the ability to show up and put forth your best effort. And you could, essentially become your own business. And that's quite different than how things used to be. But at the same time, the value is still there. So when you ask, how do companies, how valuable is the gig economy, and how do we ensure that people who are working in this particular economy as, sort of temporary workforce, how do we ensure that they're treated fairly? Well, I'll say we ensure that in the same way that we ensure that all people that work are treated fairly. As company leaders, how do we treat our vendors fairly, right? How do we treat, those contractors that have worked for us for years fairly, whether they're in IT or whether they're in hardware, whatever. Really, empathy and human communication, treating others fairly, both through compensation and all of that. That sort of whole ecosystem, I don't think just lies with employee-employer relationship. I think now, especially when you have a gig economy, it permeates everywhere throughout your business.
Yeah, I think so. And it's really the underlying philosophy, about how you're going to treat people and stakeholders in your organization. So whether they're a traditional employee, whether, like you said, like a supplier, a freelancer, a gig worker, contract worker, whatever, right? Whatever category you put them into, do you have an underlying philosophy that you're going to treat people with dignity and respect, that you're going to treat them fairly, that you're going to value your human capital and the human assets of the organization? And that's an important question. And I think, one of the reasons why organizations have really leaned into gig work, just like workers have, like, millennial and Gen Z individuals are disproportionately, more so than other earlier generations, opting for gig work. They like the flexibility, they like the autonomy and all of that. So certainly from the worker side, there's some pull that direction, but from the employer side, there's definitely pull that direction because they save on benefits costs and some of the other things associated with having people who are traditional employees of the organization. And so if you're starting from a place of how do we save labor costs, in part, we do that by having more part-time employees. We have more freelance or contract employees or contract workers rather, so that we can cut back on certain costs. I think that doesn't necessarily mean then that you're going to jump to, I'm going to take advantage in every way I possibly can, these gig workers, but it's also not that far of a step that direction unless you're careful. So we have to stay true to like what our core values as an organization are. If we value people, if we value our employees, let's remember that we also need to be valuing our gig workers, our contract workers, our suppliers, everyone who's in the ecosystem of our organization. All the people involved need to be treated fairly. One of the things that's super interesting to me is just seeing how this is playing out in both the court of public opinion and actual courts. So, for example, in California, just recently, there was a pretty high profile case where essentially you have some of these rideshare apps where the drivers are saying, hey, we're employees. We're treated as gig workers. We don't have benefits. We don't have protections. We don't have any of these things that traditional employees have, but we're, for all extents and purposes, like treated like employees. We have the expectations of employees, etc. And so it goes to court, and essentially, California, which tends to have more progressive liberal employment laws, still sided with the companies. And so it's super interesting to see how this will continue to evolve. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg here, and it's because it's just so new. Like the prevalence of this is so new that I suspect in the next 5 to 10 years that we're going to see more and more discussion around this, and probably some public policy and even some legal decisions, if not flat out, legislation around, how we approach gig workers. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around the gig economy employment law kind of landscape and how that might be hurting gig workers, what might need to change there in order to level the playing field a little bit.
Make this Christmas memorable with Goat Guns. Get the coolest miniature gun models for your collection. From historical classics to modern weapons, we have something for every firearm and hobby enthusiast. Surprise your loved ones with the gift of Goat Guns, the perfect blend of quality and detail. Shop now and spread the joy at goatguns.com.
Monetizing digital services since 2004. Boosting the entertainment industry by making digital content accessible for everyone. AWG, where innovation meets monetization.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Traditionally, gig workers, whether they're temporary employees and independent contractors, any of that, they usually command somewhat of a higher premium pay rate than their counterparts that are permanent employees or full-time employees. And now I say this specifically in the staffing industry, specifically focusing on more of the blue collar, more of the industrial types of roles that I've staffed for many, many years. And the reason is because frankly, they don't have the benefits. They don't have the same commitment a lot of the times to a particular job. They're there to use, they have the skills necessary for that particular role. They're there to execute that role, and they may do it for as short as a day or as long as a month or so, and then they move on. So the idea is that while they may not enjoy the same benefits as maybe a counterpart that is a full-time employee working there, they are enjoying somewhat of a higher rate, somewhat of a higher pay rate. So what happens with that, to sort of address one of the points you just made, is a lot of the times, and I don't see it as much anymore, but it used to be so prevalent back in the early 2000s, and frankly, as little as 5 years ago, as little as behind the pandemic, that when temporary employees would come in, when gig workers would come in, whether it's project-based, whether it's based on some sort of cyclical, seasonal need, they were treated as like cattle, honestly. And a lot of the times, hey, they're temps, you don't have to treat them any certain way, cut them early. Hey, they're really expensive, and bifurcating the full-time employees from those temporary employees. And a lot of the times, some of the people that would work at a particular job site would see some contractors coming in, and inevitably they'd maybe discover that those folks were getting a couple of dollars more per hour, and there'd be some dissension there, and that would turn into something that wasn't necessarily productive, wasn't necessarily healthy in the workplace. What I think I've found now, and I've been actually working on this for years, how do we somehow give some sort of benefit, some sort of access to healthcare to those who are working in different companies, different jobs, particularly, potentially different roles, which is extremely difficult for a staffing company or a gig economy company that's primary driver is to be able to accommodate the needs of multiple companies across multiple industries. And when companies are extremely price sensitive, as they always are, they're not always, willing to necessarily pay a premium for staff coming in because, hey, they happen to have insurance, right? They're not necessarily, happy to do that. So you find yourself in a position where, okay, how do we begin to really treat our employees, and my company Gravy Work would have all of its, and my background as a in the staffing industry has always been W-2 employees. That's just kind of the way it ran. How is it that we can provide some sort of benefits and still be able to be feasible as a company, right? How do we somehow include these benefits into a margin that already is sort of slim, specifically in the industrial side of things? And so what we find is, well, there's different programs, especially these days, where they have benefits programs that are lower cost, but they still give access to some healthcare options that are, sort of premium. Those are coming out now. There's also really what I've done is where as much as we can, we want to be able to provide access to actually healthcare benefits. What I've done is always provided access to other sorts of benefits. So whether it's skills training, I founded something called the Hospitality Training Institute to be able to give government funded skills training, to be able to up-level people, not in just their technical skills, but soft skills. It could be anything from, being able to be an, empathetic listener, being able to improve on their English, ESL, things like that, to where, okay, it's something that is absolutely a win-win. People are learning to be able to earn more for themselves, provide a better living for themselves and their family. And hey, how can we just kind of continue to take care of them, in times of need? How can we form a community around our workforce, even though they're gig workers? And for me specifically, that doesn't just translate to a group of potentially transient workers. It should absolutely translate to a more permanent, stable workforce. Like, how do you build a community within your teams? How do you do that? And if you can do it for a gig economy platform, if you can do it for a group of workers that are working in different locations, potentially doing different roles at different pay rates every day, then you can absolutely do it in all sorts of companies. And that's sort of what we put together. So how we do that is, finding ways for people to actually connect in person with each other. And then actually, instead of sort of trying to instill a company philosophy or trying to push out, maybe a new feature on our particular platform, really having a quorum, a forum, really understanding, hey, what's important to you? What's happening in your world? What is it that we can do to somehow support what you're up to? Right. And so that's initially where a lot of the training programs we had put together come from. And that's where I think, and there are different healthcare, companies, especially startups happening now that really want to address this problem. But that's where the creativity comes in. You sort of listen to what's happening in the workforce's lives, what their needs are, and then you start to find solutions to those things. And building community, I think, is really key there. And the good news is, I think leaders and companies in corporate America are starting to wake up to this, specifically after the pandemic, which has decimated the hospitality industry and other industries, which just needed those service level, devoted employees. They just realized that, hey, employees are not just some commodity. These people have needs, and guess what? Profits are healthy when you have people that are healthy and happy to be there. And you retain more people. So it's all of like the basics of running a good company come with devising ways to be able to build community around your workforce, be them gig workers or full-time, quote unquote permanent employees. Although I don't know exactly what a permanent employee, I don't think there's anything permanent necessarily in employment, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I like how you frame it as your workforce. Because a lot of times we talk about our employees, and then you have these other categories. Oh, the contract workers, the freelance gig worker, people. And you're right. In a lot of organizations, they're treated differently, very differently. And so, let's start to wrap our mind around our workforce. And then that includes everybody. That includes all the different categories. And so, if I'm, running a project and I have some people who are on my staff who are traditional employees, but I also have some contract people, maybe distributed people from other parts of the world, whatever. If I'm trying, like you said, try to build community, try to make community a sense of belonging. When you do that, it raises the level of output from everybody. You're going to have better stuff. You're going to have better projects, better solutions. You're going to innovate and create more. Your people are just going to be more motivated. They're going to be more productive. All of the good positive outcomes, that we talk about in treating your employees well for employee engagement and such, it applies to freelance and gig workers and contract workers just the same. And a lot of times it is those contingent workers that feel totally disconnected from the organization. And so then, you're dealing as a manager, as a leader, if you're not fostering that community, you're going to be dealing with trying to, get production out of people that don't feel any real commitment, investment, or loyalty to what you're trying to do. And of course, that's what we want. We want everyone to be committed and loyal. And whether we have designated people, as freelance gig workers, or perhaps that's what they prefer. Maybe they don't want to be a traditional employee. They want to be, work on a project basis. They want to be a gig worker. Fine, but let's still keep that interaction in a similar way, where we just treat everyone in our workforce as part of the team. Team members. We don't have to think differently about people from the different groups they might come from.
I agree. And, this brings to mind something recently. I've been doing a lot of traveling. And so as such, I've been taking lots of rideshare types of, trips, and, jumping on lots of shuttles, whether they're rental car shuttles or, airport shuttles or what have you. And one thing I noticed, actually recently, just a couple days ago, I got into a ride share, and the person who was driving, an independent contractor, right, a gig worker. When I got in, he had hand wipes in the back. He had bottles of water. He asked if the smell was okay. I asked if there was a particular type of music I wanted to listen to. And so he really took pride in his car and what he was doing. And I took notice of that. And this is a gig worker, but ultimately he's representing that rideshare company to a great degree, right? And then I was dropped off at the airport, or what have you. I think I had to get on an airport shuttle, and then I jumped on an airport shuttle, and the airport shuttle driver just seemed angry. Like, he didn't seem like he wanted to be there. And I remember I was standing there, and he kind of shuffled through the front, and I said, "Hey, am I going to, gate whatever?" And he was like, "I don't know, I think so. See you later." And so at the end of the day, look, I mean, we're all human beings. These are all human beings, right? And some really take pride in a service they're delivering, and they take pride in themselves, maybe. And then others might be feeling as though they're working for a monolith. They might be, their voice doesn't matter, or maybe just a bad day, and who cares? This is kind of what I do. This stuff shows up, whether it's gig worker, whether it's employee, right? It really is starting to really understand. I mean, what I think is, you really just have to build a connection with the people that are working, that are there. Like what is it? Maybe that shuttle driver maybe truly did have a bad day, and this was just, this was a one-off for him. Or maybe he just, maybe that job isn't what he's necessarily looking for anymore. Maybe there's something else he could potentially do, and he just feels stuck. I don't know, right? But at the end of the day, it's up to the employer, or up to the company that is hiring, or that the platform that the individuals are working on, to be able to build that bridge. And that's just going to provide a better experience for that person, and for whoever's using that service or that product, right? And it's not easy, but it really does take leadership to be open to that and to do something differently. Like, how do we actually connect with our workers outside of, the pay per hour, or the transaction that worker happens to be performing? And companies aren't used to doing that. And so I think though, that specifically with Gen Z and moving forward, I think more people, just realize they have more options, and they want their companies to be aligned with their values, or they want their companies to understand them a little bit more. I think that's just something that's happening in sort of the zeitgeist. So companies have to evolve, or I think they're going to just not be able to connect with their workers. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. And you are in danger of falling into irrelevance in the labor market, right?
Totally.
We have a tight labor market. We have skills gaps, particularly in STEM fields and healthcare. There's a variety of places where we just don't have enough people who have the skills necessary. And if you have good people that work with your organization, whether they're a traditional employee, a contingent worker of whatever shape or size, and they're good, you can't afford to lose them. You got to treat them as part of the team, and you want them to continue to contribute to your organization, because people have options. We need to make sure that we lean into this so we stay relevant in the labor force, so that we can have the people that will help us do good, cool stuff to take to the market. And ultimately, coming back to where we started, I mean, just treating everyone with dignity and respect, treating people fairly. If that's a core value, and I do believe most leaders, most organizations, espouse that, at least as an aspirational goal, that they want to do that. And so if we truly believe that, let's just remember that that does extend to the contingent workforce, those people that work with us, for us, maybe on a project basis as gig workers, that we still need to make sure that we're treating them well also.
Yeah.
Alex,
I agree.
Yeah, great. It has been a real pleasure. I note the time and I need to let you go. But before we wrap things up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, absolutely. So to connect with me, you can, well, my name is Alex Atwood. You can search my name. My website's alexatwood.co. So that's ALEXAT1TWOOD.co. And this was an excellent conversation today. I think one thing I'd like to sort of leave with is specifically for leaders, ask your employees or your gig workers, your team members, how they'd like to be supported rather than making assumptions. I think a lot of the times leaders assume what their team members need. And I think that's, you're missing a lot there. It's actually kind of missing the point. Reach out to your team members, understand what's happening, openly discuss, and then that will then shed light on how you can better support your teams, because ultimately that's the key. Learn how to listen and have voices be heard.
Love it. Alex, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Alex can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.